Welcome to another episode of Foundational Foundry, the tutorial series from the Foundry Roundtable. I'm Greendragoon, and with me are my co-hosts, Dorgan1701,
Hello.
Markhawkman,
Hey.
and Duncan Idaho.
Hello.
This week we'll be continuing our build on our introductory Foundry mission. We got through the space map last week, and this week we're going to beam down to the planet below. This is going to be fun because we get to rescue the crew of a crashed starship forced down by Orions. I mean, what's not cool about crashed starships? As a matter of fact, I got my start in crashed starships. Anyway, we've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. All right, so next up in the story, we've got our next map, which is going to be the surface. And I went ahead and when I was picking the planets, I went for that icy M-class planet. So I think that would be a good something to look for. So we're going to actually choose an outdoor map. And so we have
several different types of icy outdoor maps.
True. So let's see what we got here. Yeah, obviously, it shows a preview of a top-down view of what the map looks like. So Andoria ground is an option. That's a pretty frozen wasteland.
Another good ice option, if you want it to be desolate and empty, is Rurapenthe.
Mm-hmm.
The two of them have very different terrain features because Rurapenthe is mostly a central valley with peaks and valleys along the sides. And Andoria has a bunch of small plateaus in the center of the map.
So I'm actually kind of liking icy clearing. Although I wish, ooh, that might work. Icy mountains. It is M-class. I mean, I imagine it's got to have at least a little, some foliage. All right, so I'm liking icy mountains. So let's go ahead and go with this one. And this is Rumble 5. Go ahead and create. All right, so in this case, this is a ground map, and it's actually a mountain ground map, so it means that there's probably a lot of terrain, like terrain variants. So I'm actually going to go ahead and preview this map now, and we can kind of get a feel for where we want to place things. So the things that we'll need to achieve on this map is we'll initially have them scan the area, which will point them to the wreckage. We'll defeat a raiding party once we get there. We'll talk to a survivor of the crash. And we'll set up 3 pattern enhancers before entering the crashed ship. Here's our map. Okay. And I can't move.
Oh, that's yeah, that bug occasionally does come up. Yeah, it's I think what it basically has done is that it's loaded up the wrong sort of movement. And I noticed this in testing a lot of space. I shifted around and all of a sudden, hey, things don't work. The workaround I found is to exit the editor completely and then load it back up.
Okay.
And that's general rule of thumb. If you find something's not working, turn it off, turn it on again. It generally fixes it.
That's one downside to the Foundry is it's actually a pretty old system, and it's survived an awful lot of the game around it changing, so it's gotten quirky in its age.
Yeah.
Kamarplasty is asking if we can waypoint buffs here. And, oh, I'm sorry, he was asking about, he was referring to when I was stuck, whether I could send my buffs anywhere.
I think you can because it's a different system. The flip side to that happening in space is your ship as starting to act like a player. So they are affected by gravity. So your ship will plummet through space, and it's pretty hilarious. Or it'll just spin in place. So it's, again, one of those things where it's an old system. It has its age, and things have cropped up. But generally, nothing's generally too critical. So small troubleshooting steps like this will occasionally be necessary.
The most hilarious one is when you go to a space map and you're in your ship and your buffs are floating through space beside you.
I have not seen that one happen yet.
Yeah, I've seen that one occasionally. All right, sure enough, your workaround worked, and I can move now. So we start off here, and we want to find a good spot that to put the crashed starship that's out of view. So they can't just see it immediately. It's like, oh, it's over there. I've got. So I'm thinking. Maybe over here, this area.
That looks pretty good. Bit of that rise, and then additional objects around it too.
Yeah. All right, so back here, I'm thinking, let's kind of make note of the map here. So back in this area. That'll work. The fun part will be getting the right elevation. Okay, so one of the more recent additions to the Foundry was what's called ground scale assets. And these are some space objects like ships that can be placed on ground maps and that are one-to-one scale. So they are super huge.
Well, not necessarily one-to-one scale, and they're not necessarily scaled to each other as well. The Klingon Moog class, for example, is really small compared to a lot of the other ships, but these are very, very huge. And what you want to use if you want to represent those items on that map.
Well, one thing to consider is, when you're placing ships is that you have the option of using the pre-made assets or custom ship costumes.
Not on ground scale.
Oh, right, you're right. We're talking about ground. Sorry.
All right, so this is a crash ship, so it's not in the greatest shape. So I'm going to go ahead and add some debris. We got a few options for ship debris. There's just various pieces of wreckage that we can place. This will kind of help sell the I'm busted look. There's one in particular I kind of want to get in here. It's this O2, which is cool because it's actually it's actually a section of hallway that
Oh, I've never used that one because I thought it was just a lump.
Oh, if you look inside, there's like there's a warped door and
Neat.
Yeah. That one item is it's basically like a chunk of the ship. I mean, because some of the tube-shaped ones you can actually walk through, which is really, really cool. But they have that. Well, they may have a high angle to them.
okay. I'm going to go ahead and preview this. It occurs to me I don't know that we're going to be able to finish all of this in one evening, so we may have to split this into two
I think
parts.
we'll have to split it up. But that's all right.
Which means this is probably going to translate into like 10 episodes of YouTube. Okay, so it's very clearly already too high, so I'm going to have to lower it down, but we'll look at some of our junk and see how that placed.
It's been impaled by trees.
Oh, this ship?
Yeah, it crashed by dropping straight down.
Yeah.
I like where that hallway is. I'm a little time delayed right now because I'm just watching the live stream on
it's
Twitch.
the
Last I looked, screen sharing wasn't going.
oh, sorry.
That's all good.
All right, so yeah, I'm liking that too.
They
So good
snowed
news.
in.
Good news is that ship's in the wrong place, but most of the debris is looking good. I might copy paste a little bit more so it's a little more uniform. Okay, so you can drop at least. That was at least 10, but I'm going to go ahead and say it was might have been 20. Might even be better. So it's kind of good to think of this as this is the foreground area and this is the background. So you'll be able to kind of see the ship in the background, but you'll really only be approaching from the foreground. And in fact, just to kind of force that, I'm actually going to place an invisible wall, a couple of invisible walls probably, just to kind of control how far they can go. And this will just kind of help prevent them from wandering somewhere they shouldn't. Especially since this map has a lot of drop-offs. We can do it pretty broadly, so
Yeah,
it's,
it doesn't need to be an abyss that the player can't escape from. Just something that's annoying enough that it causes them to have to spend 20 minutes or so figuring out how to get back to where they used to be. I guess the best way to put it is it interrupts mission progress even if it doesn't stop it.
Yeah, so this will just kind of keep them from wandering too far. That'll be kind of nice. All right, so test again. That's kind of the hard part of grounded interior maps versus space maps is because you have a much more of a concept of up and down. Getting things just right takes that much longer.
Yeah, and you're dealing with a lot more fine scale detail too. So the placement of one rock next to another rock, in interiors it can get really complicated. But generally, when building the Foundry, space maps are relatively quick and easy because if things are, say, 5 kilometers apart in game terms, it's really not that big of a deal. Here, it can be the difference between for example, a tree poking out of a ship and a tree not poking out of a ship.
Which reminds me, I forgot to move the ship to get the tree to not poke out of it.
I have actually seen people do things on space maps that made building a city on a ground map seem easy.
It depends on how far you want to go. The last mission I made had a rather complicated asteroid field setup, but the one I'm working on right now has a much cleaner space map. So again, it always depends.
One in particular that strikes me as being particularly epic is one that was made for one of the Foundry Challenge entries, where a guy built a map for a cave inside an asteroid.
All right, we are getting much closer. I think another 10 down, we should have it.
Yeah,
it looks pretty good.
That particular thing was one of those where I can't imagine just how many hours Clinto Bean spent placing rocks in that space map to build an asteroid cave.
Depends on how he did it. I can imagine a shortcut. You build basically a loop. You copy that. And actually, you can even just do it as a single copy-paste operation, because when you do that for objects that have different heights, it'll actually preserve the relative position. It won't save what you set it to, but it'll save the relative orientation of those objects versus each other. So if you, depending on how you set it up, you could...
What Clinto Bean did is that for the tunnels that were like the relatively small parts where you would like fly through and didn't really have much room to maneuver, he actually took the big donut-shaped asteroids and stuck them in a row.
Yeah, that's a very simple operation.
It was the floor and ceiling parts that were awkward, because when I look at the map, I see what had to have been like dozens of separate asteroid objects placed on the map.
Okay. So, my ship's way down there. Well, that's because I moved it, and it's been adjusting to terrain, and terrain's way down there, over there.
It'd be a good time to explain about setting to 0 altitude.
Yeah. So
Yes,
this isn't something you have to worry about in space maps, but in ground maps you have this y relative too, and by default it's set to terrain. And then in this case, where we're dealing with a terrain that varies wildly, this is not a good thing. So we have several options, but in this case, what we want is 0 altitude, and this will reset it based on wherever the origin point is. But the big good thing about this, though, is that no matter where the object is placed, y will always be the same value. So especially when we're dealing with multiple objects that need to be aligned, this can be super useful. I'm also going to move my spawn point way closer so I don't have to keep running.
That's one quick piece of advice to throw out while testing. If you're just seeing how a map works, you don't necessarily need to have that spawn point where you're ultimately planning on having the player spawn. You can just move it right next to what you want to see and just basically keep going back and forth. Move it around just basically where you need it to be. And then once you're all done the map, then you place it where you ultimately want the player to start.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously we have to kind of reacclimate to the relative to y relative to absolute 0. And so it's going to take a little bit more fine-tuning, but...
And not too bad, because it's you can at least see the ship.
Yeah.
One helpful trick for when you've placed an object and you can't figure out what altitude the object is, this is especially useful on interior maps, because if it's above the ceiling or below the floor, you'll never see it at all, is to set an object and interact with objective, just a temporary thing you add to the story tab where you need to interact with that object. That way, when you preview the map, you can push V and it will point the scanning beam at the object.
Okay, that's almost there. See if I can get a good look at it. We're going to try 15. And just so you know, all of these measurements are in meters, just to kind of give you a some concept of the scale we're working in. So, I mean, a meter is about 1.5 meters is about the height of the player character. So usually you can kind of use that to...
There is a function that you can use when you're in preview to determine the location of your character, which is you put in a slash and then LOC and then hit enter. And it will show you like your XYZ coordinates. Thing is, those are in feet. And you have to convert to meters to figure out where you are relative to where the coordinates to place your Foundry assets.
Yeah. I think most players are probably not going to want to... All right, we are super close and slightly intersecting our... I mean... Yeah, I mean, kind of hesitant to play with it too much more. Be here all night.
It's good enough for the moment. I like the perspective, though, of seeing it behind the debris there.
All right, I'm just going to call it 10 and call it good.
Yeah, throughout this time, I've been working on another project, and let's just say it's been a lot less dynamic for the edits I've been making.
All right, so got our crash ship, and actually I'm going to grab some of this debris. Sometimes it's just easier to copy paste don't want our starship to look too clean. That's nice. Sometimes it's just easier to grab a group of assets and all right, so that'll make it look a little more beat up.
I didn't know you could do that with a button.
Do what with a button?
Oh, create a new set of objects. So the copy paste automatic. I've just been doing Control-C, Control-V.
Yeah, it's the right here, the duplicate currently selected object.
Yeah.
Right next to the delete button. Don't get it confused.
And it's also worth noting at this point, too, there is also an undo feature and redo. So that is a great safety.
If you actually do something, you can just push Control Z and undelete it.
All right, so we are, for the sake of our story, we're actually going to need an NPC contact, specifically a Starfleet officer. I don't think we need to create anyone too complicated, so I think a stock NPC will do. I'm going to place him out here, and then I'm going to have our Starfleet ensign guarded by a hostile group of Orions.
The really scary Orions are the ones that aren't hostile. Those are the ones where you really never know what they're going to do to you.
Well, they're probably hostile. They're just not telling you. And so we're going to have a little fun. Okay, so for our NPC contact, we can select our behavior. And we don't need anything them to do, or need her to do anything fancy. So I'm actually going to just do the contact, basic contact behavior. I can select an animation and use one of the bound animations.
I was going to suggest huddle in fetal position.
Make it hard to talk to her afterwards.
Can we do like a state transition to have the huddling version of the NPC disappear and then the standing up version appear?
We do want to finish something soon tonight.
Okay, trying looking through the notes here. What else do we need? You will need to set up some pattern enhancers. And I definitely don't think we'll finish even this map tonight, but if we can get all the assets placed, I think that might be a good stopping point.
We actually have the prop from the triolic pattern enhancers in the Foundry, don't we?
Yep.
We have a set of pattern enhancers. And this will make sense in a bit, but we're also going to need a special effect for these.
Explosion?
Not quite. We can find it here. Okay, so light rays small O1 is a fun little effect that basically looks like a glowing spot on the ground with these light beams emanating from it. And for our sake, these work perfectly as indicators for where we're going to place the pattern enhancers, because we have the we're going to have the player place each of the pattern enhancers. All right, so that pretty much is all the assets we're going to need. move our spawn point back to a little further away. I take it back. We will need a invisible object. Which will come into play a little bit later. All right, well, I think we're going to have to stop here for this episode as we're just about out of time. Just to recap, in this episode, we started building our ground map, we set up a crashed starship, and we set up a little interaction by having the player set up some pattern enhancers. Next week, we'll pick up where we left off and continue working on ground maps, so stay tuned. Until then, we'll wish you all good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Night good.